Hey guys, what's up? So earlier on Canvas, you should have completed or been looking at some of the questions regarding the rise of unions, as the title suggests. So what I wanted to do with you is to go through the answers to the questions. So number one, it asks the question, historically, what caused the rise of unions? And very simply, the answer is the Industrial Revolution. It was the conditions in which people lived, ultimately, that gave rise to people coming together to form these collectives called unions, and to fight for more, right? To fight for a bigger piece of the pie. So yeah, ultimately, it was the abuses of laissez-faire which helped to, I guess, cause people to push for unions. Now, number two, why do people unionize? Well, as I mentioned in the presentation before, the video that you should have watched already, the answer to this is very simple. The answer would be strength in numbers. If one person comes to a boss and says, you know, I want better benefits, I want weekends off, things like that, chances are you're going to be seeing the door. However, if everybody comes to the boss and says, we want more time off, we want better benefits, we want maternity leave, pensions, all these different things, it becomes a much more compelling argument when you have a large group of people. So yeah, people unionize because of the strength in numbers and the power that you get from that when it comes to negotiation. All right, number three. So what rights have been secured for people today due to unions? So as unions started to form about 150 or so years ago, right, mid-1800s during the Industrial Revolution, a number of things were won by what Marx would call the proletariat. Things like, as I kind of mentioned in number two, weekends off, sick pay, pensions, paternity and maternity leave, minimum wages, like all sorts of rights were won by unions. Continuing, number four, it says identify two state governments that have attempted to destroy unions. Quite often we call that activity union busting. And then give two reasons, or what reasons have these states given as to why unions need to go. So in the PowerPoint that we were looking at, that you should have went through, we discussed Michigan and Wisconsin. Oddly enough, both those states are Republican states. And that sort of leads us into further down in the questions, and we'll see that here in a second. But anyways, so these Republican states, Republicans are found on the right side of the political spectrum. They believe in free market capitalism. They believe in profit motive, all these different things. So they're not super friendly to unions. Now, number five, identify the importance of framing union busting as right-to-work legislation and what is dangerous about this legislation from a liberal perspective. When we say liberal perspective here, we're talking modern liberal. So the right to work. Why do we call it the right to work? Why do we not call it the weakening union laws or something like that? Well, right to work sounds much more positive. When you want to sell an idea to people, you have to make sure that you frame it as positively as possible. So when you frame it as the right to work, what we get is people being much more amenable to the idea. Really what right to work is, however, is the right to work in a closed shop environment, or in an environment that used to be a closed shop. Basically, it's the right to opt out of unions. So ultimately, people support right to work frame it as a freedom issue, right? I should have the freedom to be in a union, or ultimately not. And they try to convince people that being forced to be in a union is a infringement on their freedom as an individual. Now, what's dangerous about this legislation? Well, ultimately, it's dangerous because people who work in unions have a much more secure life in general, right? Not always, but in general. As we mentioned before, unions built the middle class. The middle class was formed by the action of unions. Before unions, we had the rich, or as Marx called them, the bourgeoisie, and also the poor, right? So there's a huge gap between those who have a lot and those who had very, very little. And ultimately what the work of unions did is it created a group of people between the rich and the poor. It moved some people up from the bottom of society, and those are the people that today we call the middle class. Number 6, if workers within a union are not happy about working conditions, what is their main mode of action to express their displeasure? Very simply, it is a strike. And then it asks, identify how unions with their collective behavior punish those who do not agree with this action. So because unions are a group of people, because they are a collective, when people don't go along with the strike action that a union is engaging in, it leads to hard feelings. Give you an example. Where my dad used to work, the truck shop used to be, or it was unionized, I believe it probably still is, and they went on strike once. Negotiations between labor and management broke down. Labor, right, the mechanics went on strike, and most of the mechanics stayed on the picket line, right? They had their signs, they weren't working, and basically they're trying to force the hand of management to give into their demands. However, some individuals chose to cross the picket line. And those individuals who crossed the picket line were being seen as basically sellouts, right? They were not supporting the union. And what happened was some of their cars got keyed, their tires got slashed as they're inside working by the workers outside picketing. Now, number 7, what is the position of neoconservatives on unions? Speculate as to why they hold this position. It's pretty simple. Neocons generally are not very friendly to unions. Unions, again, are more of a leftist idea, right? More socialist, and the left and the right, in this case, just don't jive. People on the right are receptive to free market capitalism, to laissez-faire, to profit motive. And, you know, if you are a capitalist, you see unions as a threat to the profit that you make, because as the worker gets more, it takes more from the boss, which the boss clearly doesn't want. And then number 8, what is the position of the modern liberal on unions, and why would they hold this position? So modern liberals, people on the left, right, more socialist or socialist-minded individuals, are much more accepting of unions. The first real major party to be pro-union here in North America, in fact, I mentioned this before, I think, was the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which was a very socialist political party in Canada, actually, in the province of Saskatchewan. And then very shortly thereafter, with the election of FDR, as we'll see coming up here soon in the next little bit of content we're going to get through, in America, unions became normalized under FDR and his New Deal. Now, why do people on the left like unions, or at least accept unions? Well, it's because the left is supposed to represent the little guy, right? When you go back to sort of the history of the more recent history of the Democratic Party in the US, right? The party on the left. It's supposed to be the party of the average worker, whereas the Republican Party, the party on the right, is more so the party of the owners of the means of production, the wealthy in society. So modern liberals are supposed to be looking out for the little guy, hence they support unions. And then number 9, just sort of wrapping it up here, what's your position on unions today? Well, I just want everyone to understand that, if you're more of a left-leaning individual, you probably think unions are useful. You probably like them. If you're more of a right-leaning individual, you probably don't like unions. You probably find them to be an antiquated, sort of a useless idea, because today we have governments that protect the rights of the worker. So anyways, if you have any further questions, reach out to me, and we will see you again. Peace.